a little bit about the Survivor Series. With the Survivor Series coming up, in a little while, Survivor Series 2025, I wanted to talk about the first Survivor Series. The first Survivor Series is a very historic event in wrestling history for the simple fact that it featured one of the first shots across the bow, if you will, between Jim Crockett Promotions and the WWF. A little bit of background on it. Jim Crockett Promotions have been doing, and it took place on Thanksgiving night, November the 26th. So today is the anniversary of it. Um, Jim Crockett Promotions had been doing, like many territories, particularly those in the southeast. Um, they would do um, Thanksgiving shows. They would do Thanksgiving shows and Christmas shows. These were the times for these wrestling territories in this part of the country where they would make the most money because after families were done with Thanksgiving dinner or done with Christmas dinner, on those events they would go to see some wrestling, at their local arena, and uh, this time was no different. You know what I mean. But one of the things that changed in 1983 was Jim Crockett's business was up tremendously. They were featuring the feud between the tag team feud of Sergeant Slaughter and Don Cornudle against uh, Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood. And this feud was so big in the territory that Crockett was like, hey, why don't we create a super show around it? Ric Flair's on fire. We could have him challenge uh, um, for the NWA Championship against then champion Harley Race, and uh, we can invite other territories, and we can broadcast this around the country. Um, through closed circuit. Big super shows have been done before. This wasn't the first one. In fact, the World Wrestling Federation, the New York territory, had done the same thing in 1972, in 1976, and in 1980. Bruno Sammartino's retirement match against his then protege Larry Zbyszko. So it was nothing really new necessarily, but for Crockett it was big, and for the NWA it was big. All the territories of the NWA came to this. You had the Briscoe brothers. They were there. It was a success. So, not to be outdone, Vince McMahon does the exact same thing in 1985. But he does it and that's when he creates WrestleMania. He does it in a different way though. He's going to invite celebrities. He invites Cyndi Lauper. He invites Mr. T. He invites Billy Martin. He invites Muhammad Ali. He invites a whole bunch of celebrities, and he does it in Madison Square Garden. That's Mr. T's in the main event. Mr. T and Hulk Hogan versus Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff. Roddy Piper, by the way, appeared on the card for the first Starrcade in a dog collar match against Greg Valentine, who also appeared on the same card. And he also appeared on the first WrestleMania, just like Greg Valentine. you know? So they both appeared on the first Starrcade and the first WrestleMania. So by 1985 in the Crockett promotion, they decided to expand it. It was done in Greensboro, North Carolina, originally the first two Starrcades. They decided to expand it to Greensboro, North Carolina, and their other principal city within their territory, Atlanta, Georgia. Because keep in mind, during Black Saturday, the Crockett promotion uh, purchased Georgia Championship Wrestling from Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon bought the promotion off of the Briscoe brothers and Ole Anderson without Ole Anderson's knowledge, um, and some of the other owners, including Jerry Oates, including Paul Jones, and basically a group of investors. And he bought the TV time. And Georgia Championship Wrestling had been the first national wrestling promotion on TV on TBS Superstation since 1973. So that was part of his plan to expand to the South. But it didn't work out because Southern wrestling fans hated the WWF. They hated Vince McMahon's style. So he was forced to sell it for $1 million to Jim Crockett, who, thanks to the first Starrcade, was a very successful promoter. But this was so. In Thanksgiving in '85, they decided to do a simulcast in one in Greensboro, North Carolina, and the other in Atlanta, Georgia, with Dusty Rhodes versus Ric Flair. That goes over well. Vince decides to do the same thing with WrestleMania 2. But if Crockett had two cities, he had one. If Crockett had two cities, Vince had three cities. And Vince not only has three cities, he also has the three biggest cities in the country. He has New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Crockett could have Atlanta and Greensboro, but Atlanta and Greensboro, that's nothing compared to New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. That's WrestleMania 2 in '86. By the time we get to '87, which is the year we're talking about now, Crockett wants to get on pay-per-view, right? Because all the other Starrcades had been, closed circuit television. He wants to get on pay-per-view. Pay-per-view is like a new thing. Vince has already cracked the pay-per-view market with WrestleMania 3. WrestleMania 3, I don't have to tell any wrestling fan how big WrestleMania 3 was. Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant. 93,173 fans packed the Pontiac Silverdome in Pontiac, Michigan, to see this historic event. Andre the Giant, who had been a babyface his entire career, since the 1970s when he first broke in, he greeted Hulk Hogan when Hulk Hogan won the championship in 1984 against the Iron Sheik. In January of '84 against the Iron Sheik, he poured champagne on Hogan's head. They were best of friends. When Hogan had his ribs crushed in the lead up to WrestleMania 2 against Bundy, Andre was by his side. But then Andre took some time off to film The Princess Bride. And when he came back on Piper's Pit, he was with Bobby the Brain Heenan, and he told Hulk Hogan, "I challenge you to a WrestleMania match, at WrestleMania." And Hogan said, "No, please, Andre, please." And he rips his crucifix off. Andre rips the crucifix off of Hogan's neck. R.I.P. Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant. But and Bobby Heenan and Roddy Piper. They're all gone. The only person still alive in that segment there was Jesse the Body Ventura. Is still kicking. Everybody else is no longer with us. But then they set the match for WrestleMania 3. Hogan wins. He body slams Andre the Giant. It is a piece of wrestling history. So with the success of this, Vince tells the cable companies, "Listen, you cannot carry Starrcade '87. You cannot carry Jim Crockett's pay-per-view, Starrcade '87. That's out the question." Right? But, because initially the cable companies think, hey, we're going to get a 2-for-1 deal. We're going to get Vince McMahon's Survivor Series, because he comes up in September of '87, he comes up with the idea of the Survivor Series. Basically, the idea is teams of 5 strive to survive. 5 wrestlers, a babyface team and a heel team, and there'll be elimination matches, and it'll come down to one sole survivor, with the main feud being Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant. And this is what his concept for the Survivor Series. But at the same time, Jim Crockett is airing Starrcade '87, and his concept is Hands of Stone Ronnie Garvin, who's the champion, taking on Ric Flair. Initially, they wanted Magnum TA. Magnum TA was supposed to be the heir apparent to Dusty Rhodes. Dusty Rhodes was starting to wind down as the face of Jim Crockett Promotions, the top babyface, and they wanted somebody else. They wanted Magnum. He was the golden boy, right? He was going to be their version of Hulk Hogan in the NWA. But he got into his motorcycle accident, so they needed somebody else. So they got Ronnie Garvin. And Ronnie Garvin became the NWA champion. Now, he was not popular, right? He was not popular with the fans at all, but this is what they had. This is Ric Flair versus Ronnie Garvin, Starrcade '87. But Vince McMahon tells him, listen, you cannot air, if you're gonna carry Starrcade '87, you cannot have, 1, you can't have the Survivor Series, and 2, you cannot have my event coming up next year, WrestleMania 4. And they didn't want this. They wanted WrestleMania 4 because they knew that Vince McMahon in the WWF, that was a proven commodity. Jim Crockett Promotions, the NWA, that was a local southern promotion that had not been on pay-per-view yet. Only closed circuit TV and only within the South. So on Thanksgiving night, 1987, yours truly was only, I wasn't even 2 years old yet. I was like 1 and a couple months, 1 and 4 months. At this juncture. So needless to say, I did not watch it. But in Ohio, Richfield, Ohio, they decide to air the first Survivor Series. Now, Ohio, the state of Ohio is an interesting selection because when it comes to wrestling history and when it comes to the wars that these promotions have with one another, Ohio was basically a battleground. Ohio, in the 50s and 60s, had been run by a gentleman by the name of Jimmy Doyle. But basically, he ran it to the ground, and then it became part of the Detroit territory under the original Sheik. But the original, especially out of Akron. But the original Sheik also ran the promotion to the ground. So when Georgia Championship Wrestling, again, I go back to Georgia Championship Wrestling, with the help of, under the booking genius of Ole Anderson, with the help of the national syndication TBS, the first place they expand outside of the state of Georgia is Ohio. But the WWF also wanted to expand to that area. So when both promotions started to expand, one of the key places, the key markets that they both tried to enter was Ohio. So there was a lot of symbolism in this. Now, following this, Jim Crockett would also try to expand to the Northeast. He already tried in Long Island. He already tried Bunkhouse Stampede in Long Island that same year in '87. Nassau Coliseum. He's like, hey, Vince is trying to come into my background in the South. I'll go to New York. He couldn't get Madison Square Garden because that was WWF territory, right? But he settled in Long Island. It was a disaster. Bunkhouse Stampede. Part of the reason was because Dusty didn't want to step down. Dusty ended up winning the Bunkhouse Stampede, right? Angering a lot of people, especially the heels, especially the Four Horsemen, because they were like, hey, what the fuck? You know what I mean? Like, they formed in 85. For 2 years straight, they constantly lost to Dusty and the other baby faces. So it was a disaster them going into Uniondale. So Jim Crockett tried, but Vince did this, you know. And then in '88, Vince would come up with the idea of his own battle royal. They had the Bunkhouse Stampede. He would come up with the Royal Rumble, and he would do it from Hamilton, Ontario, in 1988. That was won by Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and it was on free TV on USA Network. So to counter program WrestleMania 4, the NWA came up with the first Clash of Champions, which featured Ric Flair versus Sting in a 30-minute draw. But for this was the first time that Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant stepped into the ring against each other since WrestleMania 3. Later, they would have a very successful match in 1988 in which Hulk Hogan would lose the championship, and it would be the highest rated wrestling match in the history of television, surpassing everything, including stuff during the Attitude Era in the 90s. So they continue to break records. But here, Hulk Hogan had his team. His team included a young Bam Bam Bigelow. Now, Bam Bam Bigelow, at this time, was a prodigy. He had been discovered by Paul Heyman. He did some wrestling matches in that famous Studio 54 in the early 1980s that Heyman promoted. And he was a local kid, you know, from Asbury Park, New Jersey. And he was amateur background. He was tremendous because he was like 300 and something pounds, but the motherfucker could move like he was a cruiserweight, like he was 120 pounds. You know, he could do cartwheels and all that stuff, and they really were putting an engine behind him. Unfortunately for him, though, he got injured shortly after this, and he was not able to recover. Right? So they let him go, and pretty soon he's in Starrcade 88. He's wrestling Barry Windham in the NWA, but he didn't do well either. So he went to Japan, and he resurfaced later in the 90s in the WWF. I met him in 1996 after he left WWF for his second term, his second go around after the LT match. But for this go round, he became the sole survivor on Hulk Hogan's team against Andre the Giant. The heels won this one. Other matches, you know, he had the women's match. They were still doing the women's division. They were about to end it pretty soon. And the Hart Foundation and Danny Davis also formed a team. But it was a pretty cool concept. I was really surprised that the baby faces lost. You know, it was foreshadowing things to come pretty soon. The arrival of the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, to the WWF, and him attempting to buy the World Wrestling Federation Championship from Hulk Hogan. Hogan turning it down, and then him doing business with Andre the Giant and Bobby Heenan. And then Earl and Dave Hebner, the twin referee angle on the Saturday Night's Main Event. And leading to the tournament at WrestleMania 4, which would culminate in the Macho Man Randy Savage winning. Here at Survivor Series, though, the Macho Man Randy Savage, ooh yeah, is a babyface. He the Hart Foundation and Honky Tonk Man were beating him up because we talked about in WrestleMania 4, the WrestleMania series, we talked about the backstage issues that were going on at that time. They wanted the Macho Man Randy Savage to be the Intercontinental Champion once again. But the Honky Tonk Man did not want to drop the belt to him on live TV. So the compromise was made that if Randy can have the IC championship, they just give him the world championship. So that changes the plans, because initially Ted DiBiase was slated to win the tournament, and Ted DiBiase was going to hold the championship for a year until Hogan beat him at WrestleMania 5. That changed. Everything changed when Honky refused to do business on live TV to Savage. So even though they turned Savage face, and here he's teaming with his former nemesis, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat had a classic. He was in Jim Crockett Promotions, but when Dusty took the book in 1983, Dusty came over from Florida. Right before Starrcade, Dusty came over, and he took the book from Dory Funk. Dory Funk Jr. Had booked the original first Starrcade, but Dusty was coming over. Jim Crockett managed to romance him away from Eddie Graham in Florida to come to the Carolinas and book the territory. And when Dusty did that, he brought in all his guys, Barry Windham and all that, and there was no real room for a young baby face like Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. So what does Steamboat do? He jumps to the WWF. Eventually he has a stellar career there, gets into an angle with Randy Savage. Randy Savage, at this point in '87, had been with WWF for 2 years. He came to the WWF in 1985 from the Memphis territory. And he was a star. You know, he had all the kayfabe, he had all the managers wanting to bid for his services. Classy Freddie Blassie, Bobby Heenan, Oliver Humperdinck, Mr. Fuji. But he brought in Miss Elizabeth, his wife, and they became a successful duo. He wins the Intercontinental Championship from Tito Santana, and then gets into the feud with Steamboat by the time WrestleMania 3 rolls around. But by the time we get here, he has lost the WWF Championship, the Intercontinental Championship to the Honky Tonk Man, another Memphis alumni. Honky had been in Memphis in the 70s, that infamous Tupelo concession stand match with him and Larry Lathan. But he developed the Honky Tonk Man character in Calgary when he went to work for Stu Hart, Elvis impersonator. And this year they brought him in, '87, they brought him in. Vince McMahon to WWF. Vince McMahon thought that he was going to be a babyface. Like I said, Vince was short-sighted with that because Elvis was a popular entertainer. He was a popular singer. But by this point, 1987, Elvis had been dead for 10 years. He died in August of '77. And he was kind of a joke to the kids in the 80s. You know, especially the Elvis that the Honky Tonk Man was portraying was not the Elvis that was shaking his hips on Ed Sullivan. It was not the Elvis that was singing Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog. He was the Vegas Elvis. He was the Elvis, fat Elvis in a jumpsuit, almost dead Elvis, right? Addicted to various medications. You know what I mean? So he was that Elvis that Wayne Ferris, the Honky Tonk Man, was portraying. You know, the Las Vegas Elvis. Las Vegas Elvis wasn't Memphis, Tennessee Elvis. You know what I mean? It's like with Michael Jackson. He had two eras. White Michael Jackson that was a shell of his former self, and black Michael Jackson that was the biggest star, you know, to ever exist. Elvis was like that. So, of course, when the Honky Tonk Man comes in with this gimmick, he's not going to be a babyface. People are not going to like him. You know what I mean? They try to make him Hulk Hogan's friend. Doesn't work out. So they do this whole thing where Fans are voting for their favorite superstar, and he's campaigning for that, but he doesn't get any votes. So when he doesn't get any votes, he turns on the fans, and he becomes a heel, which eventually leads him to become the one of the longest reigning Intercontinental Champions of all time. But and once again, Paul Orndorff is a babyface again. Paul Orndorff kind of switched back and forth. Like after WrestleMania 1, his team lost. He became a heel. And then a babyface. Orton and Piper turned on him, and then he became a heel again when he turned on Hogan. But right now, he's a babyface once again. But what did I think of this? I always liked this. I thought the Survivor Series was a cool concept. In general, because nothing like that had ever been done in wrestling. They had they would develop Dusty Rhodes would war games, which would be even better. And now, that since Triple H has taken over in 2022, they combined them and they have War Games Survivor Series, which they're having this year. Again, with CM Punk and Cody Rhodes and the Usos and Roman Reigns on the babyface side against The Vision, Brock Lesnar, and Drew McIntyre. But this was a cool concept, man. And while this isn't my favorite Survivor Series, my absolute favorite Survivor Series of all time is probably Survivor Series. And you guys are going to laugh because this wasn't the height of creative in WWE. This was 1993, the last show at the Boston Garden. Because it was the first Survivor Series I watched. Like I often say, in the early 90s, I was becoming a huge wrestling fan. By 1993, 1994, 1995, there was no bigger fan than me. I had the belts, I had the posters, I had everything. So that period of wrestling history that people say is the worst period in WWF history, to me was the greatest period because I was a kid and I was into it. You know what I mean? Heavily. So people look down on 93, but to me it was my favorite year. As far as creatively, I would say the best Survivor Series probably is 02. It was in Madison Square Garden. I wasn't there, but I watched it. First Elimination Chamber with Shawn Michaels won the World Heavyweight Championship after being gone for so many years. It was pretty cool. Brock Lesnar versus Big Show. Awesome. But as far as this one, I just like this one, not necessarily for the matches, but just for the history, guys, and what it meant to the world of professional wrestling and the competition between WWF and JCP at the time. Peace, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And by the way, this caused Jim Crockett Promotions to move the event from Thanksgiving Day to Christmas Day by 1988. And 88 would feature Luger versus Ric Flair. And by 1988, NWA and Jim Crockett Promotions were going through some major changes. In 87, they would purchase Bill Watts' promotion out of Louisiana. Bill Watts, of course, we know the story of Bill Watts. He took over for Leroy McGuirk. In 1979, he decides to move the headquarters of the promotion that was headquartered in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to Shreveport, Louisiana. And given the demographics of the state of Louisiana, and particularly the city of New Orleans, he makes Junkyard, this is a majority black city, so he makes Junkyard Dog his champion, has the feud with JYD and the Freebirds. And he builds it around guys like the JYD, Butch Reed. Butch Reed is in this event as well. But by 1984, JYD leaves the promotion, goes to the WWF, and Bill Watts really has nobody. And then by the late 80s, there's an oil recession, and he's based in oil states. He's based in Louisiana, he's based in Arkansas, He's based in Oklahoma. He's based in East Texas, Houston. You know what I mean? He runs these particular areas of the country, and he with the oil recession, he has to go under and he has to sell to one of the big two, either Crockett or McMahon. He chooses to sell to Crockett. So Crockett uh, shells out all the money he has to basically buy Bill Watts' promotion, because Watts tried to go national. All these other promotions are going national. World Class is going national out of Dallas. Um, JCP is going national out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Vince is going national out of New York. They're all trying to go national, so Watts does the same thing. The name of the promotion changes from Mid-South Wrestling to the Universal Wrestling Federation. But Watts just can't do it, so he sells to Crockett, but Crockett moves his headquarters from Charlotte to Dallas. But that puts Crockett in debt, so Crockett in '88, he has to sell his company to Ted Turner. And in 1988, that's when Jim Crockett Promotions becomes World Championship Wrestling, which is what it was when I discovered it. You know, they moved their headquarters to Atlanta, and it becomes WCW. When I discovered it in September of 1993, Fall Brawl 93, War Games, it was already WCW. And we know the story behind that. WCW lasts until 2001 when Vince buys it. So a lot of backstage machinations here in 1987. A huge year for professional wrestling. Really one of the biggest years in wrestling history. I say 1982 is probably the biggest year in professional wrestling, because that was the year that Vince McMahon buys the WWF from his father. And that was the year on Christmas Day, 1982, that the Freebirds and the Von Erichs begin their feud after Michael Hayes slams the door in Kerry Von Erich's face. We talked about that on the channel when we did the Von Erich review. That was also the year that JYD began his feud with Ted DiBiase. JYD had a match with Ted DiBiase, a loser leaves town match. JYD lost that match, and he comes back as Stagger Lee, right? Under a mask as Stagger Lee. Everybody's saying, "You're the JYD, you're the JYD." This was in Mid-South. "You're the JYD," and he's like, "No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm Stagger Lee, Stagger Lee." And Ted DiBiase and the Rat Pack, Jim Duggan and Matt Bourne, they're trying to prove that he is the JYD, but it's like, no, he's not. That was a take on an angle that Dusty Rhodes had done in Florida where he was the yellow dog. Later on, that same thing would be, that's kind of like now. We see that angle right going on right now where Grande Americano, people are saying El Grande Americano is Chad Gable. And Chad Gable and Ludwig Kaiser are saying, no, he's not. You know, that's not him under the mask, when really it is. Hulk Hogan would do that in 2003 with Mr. America as well. After being fired on screen by Vince McMahon. It's an old wrestling trick. But that was in '82 as well. In '82, also, the Wrestling Observer newsletter gets launched, the first wrestling magazine publication to really cover wrestling as it is. Not kayfabe. They didn't treat the storylines as real like other Stanley Weston magazines, that Bill Apter or the Apter mags, like The Wrestler, like Pro Wrestling Illustrated. They would treat them as real. You know, Dave Meltzer treated the wrestling fan with intelligence, and it became an influential magazine. Even though the wrestling industry, promoters and wrestlers, they never liked it because it exposed the business for being fake, right? But so they came after Meltzer for things like that. They called it the dirt sheets and shit. But it changed the way fandom is. So '82 is probably the biggest year. But next to '82, probably '87 and '85 are true contenders for being some of the biggest years in professional wrestling history in the '80s. You know, just for all that was happening that year. Anyway, guys, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Love you guys. Just wanted to. We did a lot of Wizard of Oz talk, movie talk. We're back to our regularly scheduled programming now. We're doing more wrestling talk, more political talk. We'll be talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene and her resignation from Congress, and what this means for MAGA and the Republicans, coming up in the future. Peace.